There's something strange about how we move through life. We walk to the train, we walk to the store, we walk home. And yet most days we arrive without remembering the walk itself. It's like our feet touch the ground, but our minds were never there. We live in a world addicted to speed. Everyone is chasing something, a deadline, a signal, a destination. And in that endless rush, we've forgotten what it means to simply walk. Not to go somewhere, not to get something done, but to be with each step, to feel the earth under our feet, to remember we're alive. What if walking wasn't just about getting somewhere? What if it was a path back to ourselves? Let me tell you a story. There was once a man who walked the same path home every night after work, a quiet road, lined with old trees. He'd done it for years, 10 minutes, no more. But one day he paused in front of his house and froze. He didn't remember the walk, not a single detail, not the wind, not the crunch of leaves underfoot, not even the sky. It was like he'd been sleepwalking with his eyes wide open. And that man was me. That was the day I realized my body had arrived, but my mind was miles away. I'd missed 10 minutes of my life, 10 minutes of breath, of movement, of presence. Gone not because I didn't have time, but because I wasn't really here. And isn't that what so many of us do? We move through our days like ghosts, present in body, absent in spirit. We check our watches but never notice the moment. We step forward but never arrive. We reach our goals but forget how we got there. We live in the illusion of motion, but we're not truly moving anywhere that matters. The Buddha once said, "The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the earth." Simple, but revolutionary, because walking in its purest form isn't just a physical act. It's a return to awareness, a sacred ritual of presence. And yet, we've turned it into a chore, a thing to be rushed, ignored, outsourced to machines. We've traded stillness for stimulation, and in doing so, we've lost one of the most ancient, natural, and powerful meditations there is: walking. The truth is, every step we take is a message to the universe. It says, "I am here, I am alive, I am awake," but only if we're truly walking, not just with our legs, but with our attention, our breath, our heart. When a child takes their first step, the whole room cheers. It's a miracle. But when was the last time you felt that way about a step? What if you could reclaim that sense of wonder, not by doing more, but by doing less with more awareness? What if your daily commute became a silent prayer? What if your walk to the mailbox was a meditation? What if each step became a whisper to the present moment, saying, "I haven't forgotten you"? This isn't about technique. It's about attention. It's not about where you're going. It's about how you go, and this simple shift from unconscious movement to mindful walking can change everything. It can quiet the noise in your head, soften the tension in your chest, awaken the silence you've been missing, because the path is not somewhere out there. It's under your feet, right now, in this moment. You don't need to find time to meditate. You just need to reclaim the time you already spend walking and turn it into a living, breathing meditation. A journey not toward a place, but toward presence. So the question is not, where are you going? The real question is, are you walking? Or are you already lost before you've taken the first step? We often think of the body as something to fix, to change, to control, a shape to sculpt, a machine to fuel, a tool to push harder, faster, longer, but rarely do we treat it as something sacred. What if your body wasn't just a vessel, but a temple? Not a temple of vanity, not a temple of performance, but a sacred space where presence is worship and every movement is a prayer. You don't have to close your eyes to meditate. You don't have to sit on a cushion to find stillness. Sometimes you just need to feel your feet. Feel them now, the soles of your feet touching the ground, holding the weight of your entire life quietly, patiently, every single day. How often do we thank them? How often do we notice them? We live in our heads so much, spinning stories, chasing thoughts, escaping the now. But the feet, they never leave the present moment. In the teachings of the Buddha, mindfulness of the body, Kayanupassana, is the foundation of all awareness. Before you can understand the mind, before you can untangle your emotions, you must first return to the body, because the body never lies. It doesn't live in the past. It doesn't worry about the future. It breathes, it steps, it is. The Buddha walked mindfully every day. He didn't just teach stillness, he embodied movement with presence. Whether walking to gather alms or circling the Bodhi tree, his steps were silent but filled with clarity. No rush, no distraction, just a pure awareness. Left foot, breath in. Right foot, breath out. Each step was a return to now, a bow to the earth, a reminder, I am alive in this moment. When was the last time you walked like that? Not dragging your body behind your racing mind. Not lost in your phone, your plans, your playlists, but walking as if it were the most important thing in the world. Because it is. Because it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. That's the secret to awakening. Every step, every breath is a doorway. And when you walk mindfully, you step through it. You cross from the unconscious to the sacred, from habit to holiness, from wandering to arriving. And the entry point, it's not a monastery. It's not a silent retreat. It's not even a yoga mat. It's your own 2 feet. Try this. Next time you walk anywhere, slow down. Feel your heel touch the ground. Then the ball of your foot. Then your toes. Feel the weight transfer. Feel the earth receiving you. No need to say anything. Just listen with your body. And suddenly, you're no longer walking on the earth. You're walking with it. You're not moving toward a place. You're becoming the path itself. This is what the ancient monks understood. This is why they walked barefoot through forests and villages. Not because they had no shoes, but because they had no need for distance between themselves and the sacred ground. Each step was a bow. Each movement a mantra. Each footprint a footprint of mindfulness. Not ego, not effort, just presence. You don't need to be a monk to walk like this. You don't need a forest. You don't need silence. You just need awareness. Right here, right now, in your body, in your breath, in your feet, because your body is not separate from your practice. It is the practice. It's not the obstacle to awakening. It's the vehicle. So the next time you take a step, don't take it for granted. Take it with grace. Take it with gratitude. And know this, you're not just walking through the world, you're waking up in it. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Faster internet, faster food, faster answers, faster lives. But in that rush to get somewhere, to be someone, to finish something, we lose the only thing that matters, this moment, the now, the only place life actually happens. When you slow down, the world doesn't fall apart. It opens up. Colors become brighter. Sounds become clearer. Your heartbeat becomes audible again. And the silence finally speaks. There's an ancient teaching in Buddhism. Peace is every step. Not every finish line, not every destination, not every accomplishment, every step. But peace doesn't arrive when you're rushing to get to the next thing. It shows up when you give the present moment your full attention without needing to escape it. We often believe that going slow is a weakness, that it means we're falling behind, that we're not trying hard enough. But going slow isn't failure, it's wisdom. The seed doesn't force itself to bloom. The moon doesn't hurry through the sky. The tree doesn't apologize for growing at its own pace, so why should you? Once I watched an old monk walk across the courtyard of a temple. It took him nearly 5 minutes to travel 10 feet. His steps were small, deliberate, silent. He wasn't trying to get somewhere. He was already there. Every muscle in his body was awake. Every breath was honored. He wasn't walking through space. He was walking through presence. And watching him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, stillness. Not the kind that comes from sitting down, but the kind that walks with you. We rush because we think there's something better ahead. We hurry because we believe this moment isn't enough. But that belief is the source of our suffering. When you rush through life, you're not just skipping steps. You're skipping your own existence. Think about it. How many meals have you eaten that you barely tasted? How many conversations have you half listened to? How many sunsets have you missed because you were too busy chasing something else? Speed doesn't bring clarity. It brings blur. It fogs the soul with noise and urgency. But slow lets you see. When you walk without rushing, your body remembers something ancient. It remembers what it feels like to belong, to be part of the earth, to be in harmony with your breath, your steps, your life. Slowness is not laziness. It's presence in motion. Try this. Next time you walk anywhere, let yourself move just a little slower, not dramatically, not so people stare, just slow enough to feel. Feel the air brush your skin, feel the way your leg rises and falls, feel the texture of the ground beneath you. You'll notice something miraculous. The mind stops spinning, the breath deepens, the heart softens, and suddenly you're no longer trying to catch up with your life. You're finally living it. There's no need to hurry, you're already here. There's nowhere more sacred than this moment, and no temple holier than your own 2 feet touching the earth. Slowness is a revolution in a world that idolizes urgency. It's a quiet rebellion, a radical act of care, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Because when you move with peace, you carry peace with you, and the world feels it, even if no one can name it. Some wounds don't bleed, some pain has no bandage, and some healing doesn't happen lying down. Sometimes healing begins when you take a step, not forward, not backward, just inward, into the moment, into the body, into yourself. We usually think of healing as something that happens in stillness, in a hospital bed, on a therapist's couch, in a room behind closed doors. But the body remembers how to heal, even in motion, especially in motion. There's something sacred about walking. It's one of the first things we learn as children, and one of the last things we struggle with when we grow old. It's more than just transportation. It's rhythm, it's balance, it's life moving forward one step at a time, and when done with awareness, it becomes medicine. I remember meeting a woman at a retreat, grieving the sudden loss of her partner. She couldn't sit still long enough to meditate. Every time she tried, the sorrow rushed in. It was too much. Too raw, too heavy, so instead she walked, every morning, barefoot slowly through the garden. No mantra, no technique, just her breath and the earth. She said it was the only place she didn't feel like she was drowning. Not because the pain disappeared, but because for the first time, she wasn't running from it, she was walking with it. Walking meditation doesn't ask you to escape. It invites you to stay with your breath, stay with your body, stay with the ache, not to fix it, but to understand it, because what you walk with long enough starts to soften, like a knot that slowly unravels, like fog that clears with the rising sun, like a broken heart that begins quietly to beat again. In Buddhism, the breath and the body are gateways to healing, and walking, when combined with mindfulness, brings those two together. With each step, the nervous system begins to relax, stress chemicals decline, the heart rate slows, and most importantly, your awareness returns. You become more than your grief, more than your fear, more than the chaos swirling in your head. You become grounded, rooted here. It's no coincidence that monks in many traditions walk in silence, not to isolate themselves, but to listen deeper. Because silence, when paired with movement, opens a space inside the heart. A space untouched by words, but rich in wisdom. That's the power of walking meditation. It doesn't demand effort. It doesn't require belief. It simply asks for presence. And in that presence, healing happens. Whether you're walking through heartbreak, burnout, anxiety, or simply the weight of being alive, your steps can carry you back to wholeness. Not in some distant future, but now, step by step, breath by breath, moment by sacred moment. You may not notice it at first. The healing is quiet, almost invisible. But one morning, you'll realize the fog in your mind has lifted. The tightness in your chest has softened, and the tears don't sting quite like before. You'll still remember the pain, but you'll also remember how you walked through it, not around it, not past it, through it, because you don't need to fix everything to be whole. You don't need to be free from wounds to feel peace. You just need to walk with awareness, with kindness, with breath. Because healing doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes with footsteps. There's a quiet magic in doing just one thing, fully, completely, without drifting anywhere else. Not thinking, not planning, not remembering, just walking. Not walking while texting, not walking while replaying arguments in your head, not walking while chasing tomorrow, just walking, step by step. Here, now, this is the art of present walking, a way of returning to life. In the very moment it's happening, and it's simpler than you think. You don't need incense. You don't need perfect silence. You don't even need to change your schedule. You just need one thing, attention. Try this. Take a step and whisper silently in your mind, I have arrived. Another step, I am home. Again, I have arrived. I am home. With each breath, you're not moving to escape the moment. You're moving to enter it. This is what Zen Master Thich and H1EA5T, H1EA1NH taught so beautifully. That peace doesn't exist in the future. It doesn't wait for your to-do list to end. It's available now, in your next step, in your next breath, but only if you choose to notice it. The mind is like a restless child, always tugging at your sleeve. Think about this. Worry about that. Run faster. But when you walk with awareness, you gently take that child by the hand and whisper, let's slow down, let's just be here. No fight, no force, just gentle return again and again. That is the practice. When you walk in presence, you begin to notice the little things, the breeze brushing your face, the soft crunch of earth beneath your feet, the way the light dances through the leaves. These details don't just appear, they were always there. You just weren't here to see them. Presence doesn't add anything new to life. It simply reveals what's already sacred. And the miracle is, you don't have to go to a temple to find this peace. The sidewalk becomes your meditation mat. The park becomes your monastery. Your own breath becomes the bell of mindfulness. Because the practice isn't about where you walk. It's about how you walk. It's about choosing to be fully alive, in the middle of what's already unfolding. You might feel silly at first, slowing down while the world rushes around you, but don't mistake pace for presence. Fast doesn't mean awake, busy doesn't mean fulfilled, and slow doesn't mean falling behind. It means finally catching up with yourself. Some people meditate for decades, but never learn how to be truly present in daily life. But one mindful step can hold the same silence as hours of sitting. Because in that step, there's no past, no future, just this heartbeat, just this breath, just this foot, kissing the earth. The practice is not about being perfect. It's about coming back, again and again, to the breath, to the body, to the ground beneath you. You might wander, that's okay. Just smile gently and return. I have arrived. I am home. One step, one miracle. Because when you truly walk in the present moment, you're not walking through the world. You're walking through eternity. And every step becomes a doorway back to your true self. Temples don't always have golden spires. Sometimes they have traffic lights, crosswalks, sidewalk cracks, and the chatter of a world that never stops moving. The sacred doesn't ask for silence, it asks for presence. And the greatest miracle of walking meditation is this. You don't have to leave your life to find your practice. You just need to enter it fully. Imagine this. You're walking to the store. It's nothing special, or so it seems. Your phone buzzes. Your thoughts swirl. You're half here, half somewhere else. But suddenly, you pause, you take a slow breath, and in that breath something shifts. You feel your foot make contact with the ground. You feel the sun resting gently on your skin. You hear a bird not just as background noise, but as a living voice in this very moment. You are here now. This is not just a street, it has become your temple, your sacred ground. Everywhere becomes a place of practice. You bring mindfulness to your steps, the grocery store aisle, the office hallway, even the parking lot after a long, tired day. These are not obstacles to your spiritual life. These are your spiritual life. We spend so much time waiting for the right conditions to be mindful. I'll meditate when I have more time. I'll be peaceful once things calm down. I'll be present when I'm in nature. But here's the truth. Life doesn't pause for your convenience. It's happening now, right where you are. So why not make this step a sacred one? You walk through crowds, then walk slowly just inside. No one has to see it. Let your breath become your anchor. Let your awareness turn each footstep into a silent bell. It's not about speed, it's about quality. Even one mindful step taken in the middle of chaos can return you to yourself. Even one slow breath taken between meetings, errands, or rushing can restore your peace. There's a story from Zen tradition. A young monk asked his teacher, "Master, how do I find enlightenment?" The teacher replied, "Have you finished your rice?" "Yes," the monk said. "Then go wash your bowl." That is walking meditation in daily life. It's not about escaping the world, it's about entering it with full awareness. Washing dishes, walking the dog, waiting in line, every act can be sacred when it's done with your whole being. And here's something beautiful. When you walk mindfully in public, you don't just change your inner world. You change the space around you. People feel it. They sense your calm. Your stillness becomes a quiet invitation. You walk slower, someone else slows too. You breathe deeply, someone nearby exhales. You smile inwardly, suddenly the world softens. Mindfulness is not private, it radiates. Like incense in the wind, it spreads without trying. You become a moving temple, not one built with bricks, but with breath and presence. So next time you walk, don't wait for the perfect place. Let your path become the place. Walk as if the earth is holy because it is. Walk as if every stranger is your teacher because they are. Walk as if your own heart is a sacred bell because it always has been. Your life doesn't need more escape. It needs more presence. You don't have to be in a monastery to be mindful. You just have to remember that the world itself is your monastery, and with every step, you're either drifting further from your true self or gently returning home. What if you could walk without going anywhere? What if progress had nothing to do with distance and everything to do with depth? In a world obsessed with forward motion, we've been trained to measure value in milestones. Steps must lead somewhere, journeys must end in achievement. But the Buddha taught something quietly radical. The goal of the path is not at the end of the path. It's within every step. That's the paradox. You walk, but you don't strive. You move, but you don't chase. And somehow, without reaching, you arrive. Striving is deeply rooted in the modern mind. We're always trying to get there, to be better, to be faster, to be someone else. Even in spiritual practice, we secretly reach. We meditate to become more calm. We walk to gain peace. We breathe to fix our stress. But the deeper path, the path of awakening, asks us to let all that go. Because striving is just another disguise of the ego. It keeps us busy, it keeps us searching, but it never lets us arrive. In walking meditation, we do the unthinkable in today's world. We walk for the sake of walking, not to burn calories, not to reach a destination, not to improve ourselves, just to walk, just to be. And in that letting go, something extraordinary happens. The tension melts. The future loses its grip. The moment reveals its quiet perfection. You begin to taste the now, not as an idea, but as a living presence. Each step becomes a homecoming. Zen masters often speak in riddles. They'll say things like, "The path is not a path, it is the walking itself." Or, "When you stop trying to arrive, you finally arrive." These aren't tricks of language, they are invitations. Invitations to experience a deeper rhythm. One not bound by goals, one not driven by anxiety. This is not passivity, it's not giving up. It's surrendering the illusion that happiness lies somewhere else. Non-striving is not laziness. It's total engagement without grasping. It's being fully alive without needing life to be different. In this way, a mindful walk becomes a mirror. Are you here or are you chasing something? Are you breathing with this moment or bargaining with the next? Are you walking to arrive or to escape? Because here's the truth most people miss. Striving never leads to peace. It only leads to more striving. The moment you believe you are not enough, you'll chase enoughness forever. But when you drop that belief, even for a moment, you stand still inside. Even as your feet move, you walk without going. And yet you arrive more fully than ever before. Try this. Next time you walk, let go of the idea of getting there. There's nowhere else you need to be. Drop into the rhythm of your steps. Feel the earth beneath you. Let the breath move like a soft breeze through your body. Walk like a cloud, effortless, weightless, open. Walk like a wave returning to the ocean, not separate from it, but a part of the great whole. Walk like this moment is enough, because it is. Some of the greatest realizations in Buddhism don't arrive through thinking. They arrive through stopping, through stepping back, slowing down, and releasing the grasp. When you no longer try to hold the moment holds you. When you no longer try to get somewhere, you realize you were never far from home. Every time your foot touches the earth, you leave behind more than a footprint. You plant a seed of intention, a seed of awareness, a seed of karma. In the stillness of walking meditation, we begin to see Life isn't built from grand gestures or far-off visions. It's shaped step by step by the energy we carry in each moment, and what we carry we leave behind. What we offer to the world in silence echoes louder than any words. The Buddha taught that karma is not fate. It's not punishment. It's simply cause and effect. Every action, every thought, every breath charged with intention, they ripple out into the world and return. So when we walk mindfully, we're not just walking for peace, we're planting peace. With each step, most people move through life unaware, rushing, reacting, pushing forward without pause, and in that rush they sow seeds of restlessness, impatience, grasping. But when you slow down, when you truly arrive in the body, you begin to choose the seeds you plant. One step of kindness, one step of forgiveness, one step of letting go, each one leaves a karmic trace. Not in the soil, but in the soul. Have you ever walked in silence after a storm? The air is clearer, the earth softer. There's a sacredness to it. That's what mindful walking does within you. It clears the inner storm. It softens the hardened ground of habit. And into that soft earth, you can plant something new. Compassion, patience, clarity, gratitude. These are not lofty ideas, they are seeds, real, living, growing energies that shape your future, shape your mind, shape the world. So the question becomes, what kind of world are you planting with your feet? Are you stomping out restlessness or walking gently with peace? Are your steps rooted in anger or in understanding? Are you running from yourself or walking home to who you really are? Because whether you're aware of it or not, karma is moving with you. The beauty of walking meditation is this. You transform karma in motion. You don't have to escape your past. You don't have to rewrite history. You just begin now with this step, with this breath, and with enough conscious steps, a new path emerges. Not carved by force, but by intention. Imagine millions of people walking just a little slower, a little more gently, a little more awake. Imagine the collective karma of a world that chooses to step mindfully. What would change? Perhaps everything. So next time your foot touches the ground, don't think of it as a mere action. It's a prayer, it's a seed, it's a choice. Plant it with care, plant it with presence, plant it with love, because each step you take is not just where you're going, it's what you're becoming. There comes a moment when you stop walking on the earth and start walking with her. The difference is subtle, but once you feel it, you'll never forget. Most of us walk like conquerors, heels pounding, minds racing, always trying to get somewhere. But the earth, she is not a road to be conquered. She is not a surface to be used. She is a living being, ancient, wise, patient, a mother. And when we walk with reverence, every step becomes a bow, every footfall becomes a prayer. Try this the next time you walk. Before your foot touches the ground, silently whisper, "I am home. I am grateful. Thank you." Let your breath carry the offering. Let your souls touch the soil like lips meeting sacred ground. You're no longer just moving your body, you're communing with something timeless. In Buddhist tradition, we say, the one who sees interbeing walks gently upon the earth. That means we are not separate. The sky is not outside of you. The tree is not just scenery. The ground is not beneath you. It is you. And when you walk with this awareness, your pace softens. Your thoughts quiet, your ego loosens its grip. The earth becomes your altar and you're walking. Your simple human walking becomes a sacred ritual. But let's be clear, this is not romanticism, it's not fantasy, it's reality. Once you wake up to it, we've been trained to overlook the sacred, to walk past flowers without smelling them, to stomp through grass without feeling it, to live on autopilot, never truly arriving. But the earth is always here, waiting, listening, holding you whether you notice her or not. What happens when you finally do notice? A shift, not in the earth, but in you. You begin to remember you are not lost, you are not separate, you belong. And then each step becomes more than a movement. It becomes an act of devotion, not to a deity in the sky, but to the miracle under your feet. You begin to walk like a monk in a temple, even if you're just crossing your living room. You carry stillness like a flame in your chest. You carry the earth in your awareness as something precious, fragile, and alive. Have you ever cried while walking? Not because you were sad, but because you suddenly realized how sacred it all is. The sunlight, the air, the birds, your breath, the fact that you're alive, and the earth is holding you, step after step, without asking for anything in return. That's prayer. Not the words, not the form, but the presence. When you walk like this, the sacred reveals itself. In a crack in the pavement, in a child's laughter, in the wind brushing your skin, in the silence between steps. You don't have to speak, you just have to walk and listen. So wherever you go, city, mountain, market, hospital, forest, hallway, remember this: you are walking on holy ground, not because the ground changed, but because you did. And when you know the earth is sacred, you can no longer walk in the same way. You slow down, you breathe deeper, you become gentle, you become a prayer in motion. At the end of every path, there is only one place to return to: yourself. Not the self of titles or roles, not the self that performs or pretends, but the quiet self, the aware self, the one who has been walking with you all along. You may have wandered through forests of confusion, cities of noise, mountains of ambition, valleys of doubt, but now you stand still. And in this stillness you realize you were never truly lost. You simply forgot. That home was never a location. It was a state of being. Each mindful step you've taken, each breath aligned with the present, was a key unlocking the door back to yourself. The door was never locked, but the noise of the world was too loud for you to hear the invitation. Now you do. Now you've remembered how to walk without running, to move without chasing, to arrive without striving. You've learned to honor your body like a sacred vessel, to treat the earth as a temple, and to walk through life as a living prayer. And most importantly, you've remembered who you are. When the mind is quiet, when the heart is open, when the steps are true, this is not the end. This is the return to the very beginning, to the first step, taken now with new eyes. The final step is the first, because awakening is not a finish line. It's a turning inward, a bow to the moment, a gentle smile that says, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm home. So the next time you walk, on a mountain trail, in your living room, through a bustling street, remember, you're not walking to get somewhere. You're walking to remember you're already here. If something in this journey spoke to you, if even one step touched your heart, then perhaps you've already begun to come home. At Zen Buddhism Wisdom, we walk this path together. One breath, one moment, one insight at a time. If you feel called to continue, we invite you to subscribe. Not out of habit, but from intention. Let this be a place you return to when the world gets loud and you need silence to guide you. Let's keep walking, gently, mindfully, together.